Hello, everyone, and happy September. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely thought I was ready for the fall, but these cooler mornings in New Jersey are making me regret that thought. But welcome to our Educate webinar this week. My name is Liana, and I'm the community manager here at Saros. Joined with me, who will be leading today's wonderful webinar, is Alex, our multimedia designer. If you have any questions for Alex during the webinar, you can throw them in the chat window and she will answer them at the end. This is also being recorded, so we will send this recording in the email tomorrow morning as well, and the deck that she goes through. But with that, I will hand it over to you, Alex, to get started.
Thanks, Liana. All right, let me share my screen. Can everybody see this? Cool. So thanks for joining our webinar today, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can create impactful content through balanced design. So my name is Alex. I am the multimedia designer on our Educate team. A little bit about me, I have a degree in film and then my master's in motion media design. And I'm currently trying to learn 3D modeling in my free time. So visual design and balance is a big part of my personal interest as well as my career. So for our agenda today, we're going to first cover understanding visual balance. Then we'll dive into the role that balance plays in content. Then we'll talk about some tips for creating balanced designs in studio, and then figure out how to identify bad designs and take a look at some examples as well as going over how to fix those in studio. So visual balance can be defined in a few different ways, but the general definition is that visual balance is distributing your visual elements in a way that leaves design feeling connected, but no part feels heavier than the other. It's laying out your design in a way that feels intentional, comfortable, and pleasing to the eye. So a great way to picture this and how I was taught to view it is by viewing it as like a seesaw. You don't want one side to be heavier than the other. And if it does have to be heavier, you want it to be like one of those, I think they're called like Bobo dolls. They're like they look like pins, like bowling pins, but you hit them and they like bobble back and forth. So the weight is on the bottom if it does need to be heavier. But why does visual balance matter? What's the purpose of all this? Visual balance can actually help your user focus better on the design. Having proper balance, especially within interactive content, can keep your users engaged without them feeling confused or like distracted by elements that are out of place. Creating designs with visual balance also creates a sense of trust and professionalism by creating coherent designs that are properly aligned with each other. And visual balance comes in a few different types. The main ones are symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, and radial balance. But we're also going to be talking about mosaic balance because, especially with digital design, I feel that that's pretty important, especially with things like social media. So we'll dive into those in just a second. But before we define these, it's important to remember that different types of balance can be used in conjunction with each other. So you won't always use just one type in design. You're probably going to use different combinations, and that's totally okay. So some of the examples that we're going to look at use more than one, and I'll try to point that out. It's also important to remember that all elements play into visual balance. So like color, weight, line, weight, texture, shape, all of those are elements that have these types of balance. So when identifying balance, it's important to remember it's more than just the placement of things, it's all of the surrounding components as well. So let's start with symmetrical balance. I'm sure we've all seen symmetrical balance and are probably very easily able to identify it in the wild. Symmetrical balance is when elements on either side of the axis, so the x-axis or the y-axis, create a mirrored effect. A good way to visualize this is if you have a piece of paper and you paint a smiley face on one side and then you fold the piece of paper in half and you unfold it, you're going to have a smiley face on both sides. So it creates that mirrored effect. So let's look at some actual examples, not just an imaginary piece of paper. So the first example that we have here, it's an escalator. If we folded this in half, it'd be symmetrical. It would match up. It's a mirrored effect that makes the design composition the same on either side. This design utilizes graphic design in a great way by having the text above this curve that's created by the shapes touching each other. Again, if we folded this straight down the middle, the graphics would match up, but also the colors would match up. So it's symmetrical not just in the design, but also in the colors. This is the same thing, it's just more of a traditional design. And this last example shows not only the x-axis being mirrored, but also the y-axis. So if we folded this horizontally or vertically, the overall containers of the images would match up. So all of those circle containers are the same. Obviously, the elements inside of it are asymmetrical. So this is a good example of how to use symmetrical and asymmetrical balance together. So speaking of asymmetry, asymmetrical balance is when elements are arranged in a way that carries the visual weight on one side more than the other. So for example, this first design uses the dark circle on the bottom left as the heavier weight, like the anchor weight, focusing on the dark contrast as the focus. Whereas the top right technically has more going on, but the shift of the black almost being like shed from this white circle makes the weight feel even between them. So dark colors have a heavier weight than lighter colors. So by placing the more simplistic but heavier weight in one corner and the more complex element with the lighter weight in the other corner, it actually feels rather even. This next example is a great example of using symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance together. So we can see that this design's shapes are mirrored. If we were to fold it on this like red white line and fold it top down, the shapes would match up, if that makes sense. So it uses asymmetry in the way that the bottom half eliminates those gradients, instead having the main focal point be this bright red that's sort of reflected in the top gradients. The bright contrast between the white background and the solid red creates such a heavy visual weight that it balances out the detailed portion of the top design. So again, while visually there is more going on the top, the stark contrast helps create the balance on the bottom. This image uses asymmetrical balance in terms of the lines that are being created as well as the colors. So there is this diagonal line that the glasses are creating with the liquid inside of them that directly crosses over the background line, creating this like X. So if you were to fold this in half, no matter which way, it wouldn't match up. It would not be symmetrical. The other way that this image uses asymmetrical balance is by using the dark liquid in the top glass against the white background, while the bottom glass has this white liquid contrasting against the black background. Again, if we were to flip this image like that, like top down, so that the black was on the top, it would feel too top heavy. So it also uses that sort of grounding point to make it feel more evenly distributed. And this last example contains symmetrical and asymmetrical balance once again. The symmetrical balance is within the first two columns here, how they all have circles of the same size. And this last column has these much larger circle. I think these are stickers, much larger stickers, including this oval that's not anywhere else on this sheet. Moving on to radial balance. Radial balance is when elements in a design rotate from a particular point and circle outwards. So this can be like spherical, circular, spiral. It's creating a circular design. So in this first example, we can see that there's like an anchor point here with each of these segments. So these segments are perfectly symmetrical in the way that they are completely identical to each other, but the way that they're all spiraling outwards is from this very bottom point, if that makes sense. So the radial design is created from this center point. This next example is probably the best visual example of radial balance, as like there's this clear circle in the middle that these points are pointing out from. Each of these points is also symmetrical in the tapering from each end in the distance between each other. This example is using negative space. We don't have like a distinct or visible point of origin. Instead, it uses that negative space between the points that it's rotating outwards from, but you can still tell that there's like a circular point here because of the shape that the design is making. I believe this is also symmetrical on both axes. My eyes might be tricking me. It's symmetrical in one of the ways. So that's for sure. The next one, our last example, is spiraling outwards. You can see these, I think this is like a shell or something. I'm gonna call these kernels because they look like popcorn kernels. You can see these like kernels are spiraling outwards, and the gradients that we see here with this darker orange, we can't see in the backgrounds of these as they get larger, but the intention is that it's still originating from this point, which is why that gradient is like hidden because it's in the background. And lastly, we have mosaic balance. So mosaic balance is when elements are distributed throughout the design in an overall balance kind of way. So it doesn't try to focus on a particular portion of the design. Instead, it tries to create an overall balance throughout the entire design with a variety of different shapes and elements. So for our first example, I included this image that uses these square tiles. There are repetitive designs and shapes throughout this image, some that are exactly the same, some that use the same design but change the colors, some that flip the orientation. All of these repetitive but different elements combined create a design that has no singular focal point. The viewer looks at the full design and then focuses on each of the tiles, then recognizes the patterns and the repetition and the changes throughout the design. For our second example, I included an actual mosaic that represents this type of balance pretty well. We can see the similarity between these sections separated by these dark lines at the ends of each of the segments. The repetition, but again, slight alterations between them make us focus on the entire composition instead of a singular focal point. And this example, you can see the altering colors as well as the shapes and the circles, the negative space, the lines that are going in different directions. All of those elements coexisting together make us focus on the entire composition rather than a specific point. And this last example, I thought was a good way to show how mosaic work can kind of be almost controlled. It's like a controlled chaos. It reminds me of collage art, or I have a real world example here, like a sticker book. Like this would be mosaic balance because each of them have their own equal space that they're taking up, and you're not focusing on a like central point. This is mostly mosaic balance is mostly going to be seen in like abstract work, but in the digital age, it's also very prevalent in like social media, which we'll talk about in just a second. So visual balance isn't just found in visual design, it's also found in the real world. It's all around us. So by taking a look at some real world examples and identifying real world areas of balance, we can better understand how to bring that balance into our designs. So when we think about symmetry, what's the first thing you guys think of? Exactly, Kelsey. Butterfly. That is my first example. Butterfly wings are a great example of symmetry, as well as snowflakes, tennis courts, the majority of human bodies. Obviously, our features aren't symmetrical, but the outlines of our bodies, two arms, two legs, if you folded us in half, our outlines would match up. So those are some examples of symmetry. When thinking about asymmetry, one major one is features. Most features on our faces or bodies, or most creatures, are actually asymmetrical. A good example of this is zebras. Zebra stripes are actually bilaterally symmetrical, but the pattern is asymmetrical because each of the stripes is different. Another example would be flowers, our internal organs. Those are all asymmetrical. And I mentioned flowers as an example of asymmetry, but it's also radial balance as well. So daisies, for example, have radial balance because they're rotating from that inner point. But the petals themselves are asymmetrical. So some other examples would be spider webs, snowflakes, wheels, mandalas, carousels. When I say carousels, I don't mean interactive carousels. I mean like the carousels that they have in malls with the horses and the benches. I don't know if they still have those in malls, but those sort of like a merry-go-round. That's the other word for it. And lastly, mosaics. So mosaic balance is mostly going to be an abstract art, but it still occurs in the real world. So some like real tangible examples would be like bento boxes, sticker sheets, wallpapers, kaleidoscopes, but they also exist in terms of like Pinterest layouts, Instagram explore pages, anything that is trying to show off like a gallery would be a mosaic balance. Yes, something can be symmetrical and radial. So like a wheel would be a great example of that. Ideally, like the spacing between the, what is it called? The lines in the wheel, that would be symmetrical. Um, Carousels, I want to say usually the spacing between like the horses would be symmetrical. So absolutely, something can be symmetrical and radial. Mandalas are also usually symmetrical. So again, these types of balance can overlap and exist with each other. So if you have radial balance, you can have something that's symmetrical and radial or asymmetrical and radial. They exist together and at the same time. So what's important is that they create a design that the end result is balanced and not like too heavy or overwhelming. So now that we understand the types of balance and how they occur, we can move on to how balance shapes content and why we should focus on using it in our designs. So balance is important because it really shapes the way that somebody views your designs. If you are a designer or an artist, I'm sure you've heard not to take critique or feedback too personally because you are not your art, which is very true. However, when you present your designs to people that are outside of your immediate network, your artwork and your designs are viewed as an extension of yourself. So the way you present your designs is how people are going to form an image of you or the company that you represent. Balance affects the first impression that a viewer has of your design. So if your design is properly balanced, it will indicate professionalism. It'll show the care and the time that you put into designing your work and the intentionality behind each of your design elements. This is important because your design matters when trying to appeal to different audiences. An architecture firm is going to have a much different approach to showing balance than like a graphic designer of an experimental film would. So the target audience needs to be considered when designing because the first impression needs to appeal to them. Balance also directs attention. If the first impression is good, users are going to stay on your design. They're going to interact and engage with the work more, especially if there's an element of like visual hierarchy that leads them in how they're supposed to read or engage with the work. So better attention leads to more engagement. More engagement leads to more memorable experiences. And in theory, more memorable experiences would lead to more success. Having proper visual hierarchy through balance also helps the readability and clarity of your design. So having a proper path for your viewers to follow is really important to make sure that your message is properly conveyed. Without that proper balance, clarity is going to be lost and your message is going to overwhelm the user. So with proper balance, the cohesion and clarity of your design will reduce the cognitive load of your viewer and leave them with a better overall impression. And lastly, the emotional balance, the emotional impact that balance has on a design. So different types of balance actually convey different tones. So symmetry is typically associated with like calmness. It's stable, it's ideal for building trust or establishing an air of professionalism. So if you're doing something corporate or very like suit and tie business-like, symmetry is typically the way to go. Asymmetry is dynamic, it's energetic, it's ideal for sparking people's curiosity and making people excited about a design. It's like quirky and interesting, but not abstract enough to drive audiences away from your content. So it's typically used in marketing, creative portfolios, things that target younger generations. Radial balance emits focus and like harmony just in the intrinsic way that it's set up. It reminds people of like a ripple effect or the butterfly effect. So it feels very spiritual and tied into nature. So interactive storytelling, things that stem from a particular idea, process flows, all of those tend to be like radial balanced. And mosaic balance has an air of like equality and rhythm. It's giving every element its own similar weight. So art galleries, catalogs, any sort of creative and playful layout where discovery is the focus is going to use mosaic balance. So how can we use balance in Studio? What are some tips to keep in mind when trying to create balanced designs? We'll look at some actual examples in Studio in just a second, but some tips to keep in mind before we do that. My first tip is to copy elements. If you are using multiple assets that are the same, put it in the right size and copy and paste it. I've quite often got into the rhythm of, oh, I need to reuse this element. Let me just copy and paste it before I have the sizing down. And then you have to go and resize everything together. Get it in the right size first, make sure it's in the right area that it needs to be, and then copy and paste that. It'll save you a lot of time. My next tip is to use the grids, rulers, and guides. This can help make sure that everything is lined up properly and is down to like the pixel perfect arrangement, which sounds a bit tedious and like nitty-gritty detail, but it can really help, especially if your design is just like a little bit off in terms of how things are arranged. It's gonna make people feel like uneasy and not know why it doesn't look quite right. So making sure that everything's down to that pixel perfect alignment can really be helpful overall. Next tip is to show the canvas layout. This can be customized to whatever you're trying to do by the particular rows or columns, and you can divide things with the spacing. This can be really helpful if you're having issues with spacing or guessing how things should be arranged. You're also able to snap to guides or canvas layouts, which is something you can toggle on and off, which can be really helpful when initially creating your design and making sure that everything's in the right place. And lastly, keep your initial design simple. Simplicity is a lot harder than you think. It's something that I personally struggle with, but being able to reduce your design down to the main focal point will keep it more interesting and will help your design remain focused on the main point. If you start reducing your elements from the beginning to make sure that your design isn't overwhelming, it can help you get to the end product faster. Too often we try to incorporate all the elements that we want in a design. And when we start moving things around, we start getting like emotionally attached to the elements that are in a design. And we don't want to get rid of something because we like the way that it looks, even though it doesn't necessarily fit with the design. So reducing your elements like right off the bat and keeping the base simple will help you a lot, especially when trying to get to the main goal of your content. So now that we have identified types of balance we can be using, the ways that balance is important, we can better establish what a bad design is and how to identify them. A little preface or disclaimer, design is a lot like beauty. It's sort of subjective. Something that I think looks really good, somebody else might think looks really bad. It's sort of subjective, but regardless of personal preference, there are certain elements and design principles that make designs better than others. So a design can fall into being bad if it lacks the balance that we talked about. As we talked about earlier, balance can be so crucial to a design that having a lack of balance can throw off the whole design. So if good balance conveys professionalism, then a lack of balance would convey being unprofessional or chaotic or messy or unorganized or unconfident. And unconfident is not the way you want your design to come across, because if you're not confident in your design, nobody else is going to be confident for you. A design can also fall into being bad if it lacks alignment issues. So anything that results in too much crowding or cluttering can lead to a lack of clarity or issues with legibility, which we talked about earlier, is an important part of design. So having improper alignment can throw off the effect of the balance that you're already working to create. So if you have things properly balanced with, let's say you're using like symmetry as your main balance, you have things properly symmetrical balanced, and then your alignment is just a bit off for like your text or whatever, it's going to make people look at your design and go, that's not quite right. But they won't know why it's not quite right unless they're like taking the time to go through it. Most of the time, they're going to look at it, go, that doesn't look quite right. It's almost there. It's like uncanny valley. They're going to be like, this is almost right, but not quite. I don't like it. And then they're going to move on. So having those alignment issues can throw off the work that the balance is trying to do. This can also be a part of a lack of visual hierarchy. With balance, visual hierarchy is very important to making sure your audience knows where to look and how to view a design. Without that guide and without that structure, your viewer is going to be overwhelmed and confused about what they're looking at. And finally, a design can be considered bad if it doesn't serve the content goals. So I think this is probably the most important one after balance. If it serves the content goal, how can it really be a bad design? So if it doesn't serve the content goal, what's the purpose of it? Design always has to have some sort of purpose or intention behind it, even with abstract art or modern art where the intention isn't as obvious, it still has a desired message that's being conveyed. Even if that message is just, I made it because I wanted to, that still needs to be conveyed. So the important thing to remember outside of balance is that design should serve the purpose of its content. So now we're going to take a look at some examples. First, we're going to look at something that our creative team made and the types of balance that they've applied. And then we'll look at this like bad design that I made and then tried to fix and then had to reflect on it and fix it again. So this is an example of something from our creative team. So starting off with visual hierarchy, the main focus is immediately drawn to this larger text, which is the point. So it's already serving its purpose. So that's already making it a good design. Below this text, we have some radial balance going on. It's not like a full circle, but you can see the curvature here. And the amount of different colors that they have going on contrast well with the black background, as well as the variety of colors that they have. So none of this looks like too repetitive. Each of these stand on their own, which makes this a good contrast for the background as well as for what they're trying to advertise. And as we scroll down here, we get these like two boxes that are comparing Saros to developers. The red versus the green colors indicate like good and bad. It's just our immediate association to those colors, color theory. Red is typically seen as stop. Green is typically seen as go, so like good and bad. We can see that this first text block has way more going on in terms of the timeline, making it appear a bit more cluttered and crowded than the other box, which is a good way to demonstrate the opposition's negative traits by correlating that clutter and overcrowding with the things that Saros avoids. So having this more clean and laid out block with the green bar shows the visual balance that Saros offers and draws a good visual comparison between the two. So now we're going to move on to this bad design that I created. For this design, I'm going to show two iterations. So for this design, we can see there's not a lot of visual hierarchy going on here. Our focus is drawn to this burger first rather than the menu. Like you can't even read the menu. Or maybe I just need new glasses, but I can't read that very well. So it's not really serving the purpose because the purpose is to show off the menu and instead you're focusing on the burgers. So we also have these soda cans over here, which take up a lot of space, which doesn't really make sense because we can't read the menu. The color scheme also doesn't really match perfectly. So it's just not a great, graphic. So I'll show you the first iteration of this where I tried to use balance to like figure it out. And then I'll show you the final experience that was tailored more for Saros and what I think is an overall better design. So to transform this, initially I used asymmetrical balance to flip these burger elements to just make more space. I thought that it evened out either side of it better, thought it made it feel a bit more evenly distributed. And then I enlarged these menus to try to make the menus more of like the focal point And then I took these soda cans, I changed the alignment of them, and I reduced the saturation a bit and changed the blending mode, which is going to be covered by this checkered bar, but that will go away in just a second. And then I duplicated this checkered bar, I lowered the opacity, and I moved them down so that they were on either end of the menu, trying to follow that asymmetry theme. And then lastly, I added, sorry, a paper texture overlay. Something I like doing. I also thought that like it would be fun with the, you know how sometimes you get a fast food burger and it has that like plastic papery wrapping on it. I tried to find that, but I couldn't, so I just went with a regular paper texture overlay. I also thought that it helped the menu pop more. So this is like a fine design. I think it's better than the initial one, but it still doesn't really serve its purpose. The menu still isn't it's not the main focal point. It's a focal point, but it doesn't get to like the meat and potatoes of what this is, which is to focus on the burger menu. So I reflected on it, I ruminated on it even, and made another version that I think really fits the purpose of this better, as well as showing how simplicity can be beneficial to balancing your design and utilizing the interactivity and the animations that Saros offers. So this is the second design. So I took advantage of the interactivity that Saros had and had this first page be really focused on those first two graphics of the menu. We have this checkered bar through the middle of it, which really helps the centering of this menu. And I placed these arrows inside of like the geometric balance that the checkered bar just intrinsically has. And when we hover over this left arrow, nothing happens because it's grayed out. But when we hover over this right arrow, you can see that it changes the color to match the color scheme of the menu. So when we click it, it brings us to the next page, and then we have some fun little cute animations. So we have this burger graphic slide in from the left, and it like reaches right at the edge of the menu, but it doesn't cross over enough to take away from the actual content of the menu. And then we have these soda cans, sorry, animate in through the left and match up with that corner, which I thought helped balance out the burger a little bit. And then we also just have the burger menu, which I think is much more in focus and more aligned with the purpose of what this is. And then you hover over the right arrow and nothing happens. You hover over the left arrow and it changes color, and you can go back. And then the graphics animate out the same way that they animated in. So as you can see, I reduced a lot of the elements that we used. I kept the paper texture over the background, but I got rid of one of the burgers. I made the soda cans a lot smaller. You can see how interactivity made our design a lot simpler and more content focused. I think this design fits the product goals a lot better than the last version or even the first starting point. So let's now go into Studio and see how these Canvas tools can help us when creating balanced designs. So this is what it looks like on the back end without any, oh, refresh. Okay, this is how it looks on the back end without any additional guides or rulers being showed. If I go into this view drop-down menu, I'm gonna click on the show rulers. So this is how you're gonna create guides if you wanna use guides for your experience. To create a guide, you can click and drag from the menu. That will bring up any additional guides that you've created beforehand. So if you wanna bring those up, you can go here, go down to Canvas guides and show guides. You can also toggle the snap to guides on. I did not do that. I will show you why. So this menu is actually 4 different images, but they were like in one image. So I had to copy and paste it and then crop it. I will double click on it so you can see. So this is all one big image. And I wanted them to each be their individual thing, just in case I did want to animate it or anything. Hello? Okay, let me redo that because I think I cropped it differently. Okay, so that is why I did not use those snap to guides. But you can use that. You can toggle that on and off. So these guides I used as where to put the arrows mostly because I wanted these arrows to be symmetrical with each other, but this background canvas, this checkered bar is actually duplicated and it's slid over. So I wanted to make sure that they were an equal distance away from each other. So I use these guides as a guideline, and these arrows are actually transparent as well. So I wanted to make sure that they were properly aligned so that you couldn't see the red behind them. I was gonna put them in the center, but then I didn't because I didn't like how it looked. So I made some creative, took some creative liberties there. So, to create guides, you will click and drag. So if you want to create a vertical guide, you will click and drag from the left. And if you want to create a horizontal guide, you will click and drag from the top. And if you want to know the exact number that your guide is at, you can click and you can click and hold at either side of the ruler and it will tell you. It'll tell you all of them. Oh, tell you all of them at the same time. So that is how to use guides and how they can be helpful. I probably use guides and grids the most in like all my designs. I think guides are just, especially if you get something in the right place, but then you want to replace it or whatever, guides is a great way to make sure that you're putting everything where you want it to be. So I'm going to turn off the canvas guides and I'm going to show you the grid now. As you can see, I have the toggle for the grid on. If we go to grid settings, you can change the color and the size of the grid. So the smaller the grid size, the smaller the block. So pretty self-explanatory. As you can see, mine is not perfectly aligned because I changed this by accident the other day, so I don't remember what it was initially at. You can also change the, the grid settings. You can change the thick lines and the color of them. So this is great, especially if you're trying to do like mosaic balance and you want to make sure that each element has an equal amount of spacing for attention. The thick lines is a great way to change that. You can also change the amount of them, the opacity. I don't remember what that was, so I'm just going to cancel that. So that is how you utilize the grids. And now we're going to look at the canvas layouts. So I'm going to go back to that view menu. I'm going to turn off the grid. I'm going to canvas layouts, show layouts. I also had the snap to layout on when I was doing this. So as you can see here, this is how I had everything lined up. So I arranged it so that the columns lined up with the menu images, and then I had I'm going to zoom in real close. I had the arrow match up just with the end of it, and the grid is just a little bit off. I used these columns initially, and then I went in and tweaked everything a little bit. So did use it as a layout guide. Obviously, it's a guide. It's not like a strict thing you have to follow. So if you want to change your canvas layout, you can go to the layout settings. So here is where you will change the columns, the rows. You can switch these on and off. You can change the number of them. I had my alignment in the center for both of these because that's how I aligned everything. I aligned the checkered bar from the center. I aligned the menu from the center. You can also change the width, the gutter. So the width here is the width of the menu, and the gutter is the spacing between the menus. And for my rows, I had my rows be the height of the top of the canvas to the top of the menu, and the bottom of the menu to the bottom of the canvas. And the gutter was, initially I had these arrows navigation in the center. So initially that was the like spacing for them too, is that I wanted those arrows to be perfectly centered, but then I changed my mind and I put them in the empty space between the checkered bars. So that is why they are a little bit off. But also, I'll show you, when I had the burger here, I had this place so that you can see it ends right where this lettuce starts. The reason why I don't have the full thing in here is because when I moved the navigation down, I moved the burger down too, just creative liberty with it. So obviously it's not like a strict guideline that you have to follow. It's a guide, it's not a you can take creative liberties with it if you decide that you don't like how you've set things up. So there are helpful layouts. They'll help the balance of things. So in conclusion, hopefully your takeaways from this are that a balanced design is a thoughtful design. Putting time and effort into making sure that each of your assets is intentionally chosen and arranged can really show the care that you have towards each of your designs. Balance is more than just the layout. It's the colors, the shape, the texture, the line weight. It's each of those surrounding elements, not just the arrangement alone. And then lastly, a bad design just doesn't serve its purpose. If a design doesn't serve its purpose, it can be like pretty and cool to look at and a good design overall, but it's not a good design because it doesn't serve its purpose. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this webinar. I will pass it back to Liana for any additional questions, comments, concerns.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions for Alex, feel free to share them in the chat and we'll answer them before we wrap up. But thank you so much, Alex, for walking us through all about balanced design and also showing us in studio how we can use the grid features, the different layout features on your canvas. Super, super helpful when you guys are creating experiences, like Alex said, to make sure that your experience is nicely balanced throughout with all the content that you're adding to it, with your interactions, all of that good stuff. But again, thank you guys so much for joining our webinar today. Be sure to check out Educate for more upcoming webinars. We have a lot of really great ones coming up for the rest of the year. And it looks like we did just get a question here. And that is, when do you start considering the layout settings in your design process? So when you first start your experience, are you considering these layout settings, or maybe as you're adding assets to the canvas?
That is a great question. For the example that I showed, after I put the menu in the middle that's when I decided I wanted that to be the focal point, and then I went and did the design layout or the canvas layout settings. So usually it's somewhere between putting those elements first in the canvas and then creating the layout settings, because that will help you set up your design overall in the future. Dallin sets his right up off the bat, so that's also a good idea. So whenever works for you would be the answer.
Really awesome. And like Alex also showed, you can also change the grids and layouts as you're designing as well. So when you set them up to start, you can always change them if needed, again, as you're designing. But looking forward to seeing you guys at the next webinar. Again, thank you so much, Alex. And we'll be sharing this recording and Alex's deck with those different examples in the follow-up email tomorrow morning. But I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, enjoys their weekend, and hopefully it stays warmer for a little bit longer wherever you guys are living. But thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining.